Hi, and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Ballot of the initiative Lebanese Green Wave. On this first episode of this series on freedom of speech, we have two speakers with us today, two guests, Gino and Jana. The floor is yours if you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Okay, hi. My name is Jana, obviously. I'm currently a clinical psychologist finishing my master's at the Lebanese University as a student. And I'm a political activist, as people give me the title. And mostly I work on political activism with Tashrin, and I'm the chair of the youth committee. So that's all.
It's good to have you with us, Jana. Gino.
Thank you.
Thank you, Riwa. Jana, Aya, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Gino, Raidy. I've been a blogger since 2010, and I've been activating about different stuff in Lebanon since 2015. Right now, I'm based in Brooklyn, in New York, and hoping to come back to a better Lebanon sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Gino. For an episode on freedom of speech, getting to have you two with us. Gino, for the work that you have been doing over the past more than a decade. I feel like with the onset of the revolution and how known your name became for freedom of speech, also sometimes, and this is a question that we're going to tackle later, but completely uncensored speech and your fight against censorship. This is going to be a very rich conversation. And Jana, also for your activism with Tashrin and being the head of the youth committee with them, and also your advocacy for freedom of speech with an emphasis on youth. I really feel like I have two speakers with us who have a lot to say on the subject today. So I would really like to ask on the attributes of freedom of speech in Lebanon versus in the US, and if there are any cultural differences so far before we tackle the local aspect of it. Because, you know, you were in Lebanon before, you were an activist in Lebanon for more than a decade, and now that you have relocated to another place, there are definitely differences in terms of the censorship that you had to go through that you no longer do, and the extent to which you can feel comfortable talking about things which you were previously, to some extent, either censored for or faced problems with for being uncensored. Jana, as well, being someone who's still based in Lebanon and who still has to deal with this, but from the inside with all the laws and all the challenges that we have been facing on that front. So how do you feel like the difference is on that front, being based locally or based abroad? Jana, since you're based locally, it would be a lot more fitting to start with you.
Thank you. It's very different from people that live here and live abroad. Gino can have experienced both, actually, living here and living abroad, and he knows the difference between them. But I can speak on behalf of myself as specifically a student and just a regular person that is active within the whole revolution and the whole manifestations that are happening, not manifestations anymore, but anything, any form of opposition that is happening now in Lebanon. Within the universities, the power is not anymore with the students, as much as of most of them, most of the universities claim that they give more liberty to the students, but the majority of the influence is coming from the people that rule the university once, which happens specifically in the Lebanese university and going on to the private institutions, which are also more liberal as well, but not as much, because most of them, the students also face a lot of difficulties expressing politically, specifically what they think or what they want. For example, what happened in NDU with the secular club in the last elections. So we all know the NDU's administration is for the Lebanese forces, and they tried to oppress them as much as they could have by not even letting most of the students that ran to the elections to continue running to the student council elections. So this is as well one of the oppression of freedom of speech, because they are against what the institution is doing as a politicized institution as it is, and it's one form of an oppression, yani.
But Jana, please correct me if I'm wrong. There has been a rise in secular independent candidates in student councils in universities across Lebanon.
Yes. And this also reflects what happened around, what's happening within the society reflects itself also on the platform within the school, the university. This is very good, and it's a very long way to go. AUB Secular Club came a long way from when it started till now, and Gino can speak about it even more. He was there since the beginning, but it's a long way to go, and there's always going to be oppression against the secular clubs specifically as well, not only any student, because they fear that it's the culture of secularism that they fear mostly.
Yes. Gino, what about your experience fighting for freedom of speech for over a decade in Lebanon and then deciding to move abroad? Because I can at least speak for myself as someone who was here with you across the past few years, and the different experience for people fighting or advocating for freedom of speech and the changes that we've been through over the past many years. And so you've been an advocate since 2010 or probably a bit earlier. And then over a year ago, you decided to move. So why did that happen? And how was that experience? And how was the difference between your experience here and your experience abroad?
Thank you, Riwa. I won't speak a lot about the culture part of freedom of speech, because my main problem is when it's the law that gets into it. So I try to always differentiate between like a company you work for or a private company deciding what their contracted employees can say versus what the government decides you can say or not. And luckily, in the United States, the First Amendment of the Constitution makes that extremely clear, that there is no way you can be you have complete freedom of speech when it comes to expressing your opinions, and the government cannot say what is okay and what isn't. Versus what happens right now in the States, where you see special interests or platforms controlled by private companies deciding what the limit is for them, who should be deplatformed or not. This is definitely a thing, a conversation that should happen. Should they have this much power? But at the end of the day, the person, even if they're deplatformed, no one is stopping them from speaking their mind freely or writing whatever they want freely. So when it comes to the state deciding what you can and cannot say, the freedom in the US is definitely, I don't think it's rivaled by anyone else in the world. Even more progressive countries around the world, there's always a caveat somewhere. You can't speak about a certain monarch, a certain symbols that are pretty special for each culture, etc. That isn't really a problem here in the US. And I've been operating as if we have a First Amendment for a lot of years, and that's probably why I eventually had to leave. It's also personal, a lot of it. Most of my family is here, has been living here for years before I did. And with everything after the revolution, it became unsustainable to be in Lebanon, whether the continuous harassment by the powers that be there, or just not being able to make ends meet, like so many other Lebanese people doing that right now or the past few years as well. So there's definitely a huge difference in those, where, of course, whenever you say something, there will always be consequences. So if you say something that people don't like, you need to be ready for those. So I understand, like, a lot of people with similar accounts to mine maybe will get a lot of collabs with brands they can do, etc. I understand mine is almost toxic. No one wants to touch that because of that, but that isn't encroaching on my freedom of expression. I don't see it that way. It's just part of the deal you have. So I'm a proponent for freedom of expression till the end, but that doesn't mean without consequences, of course. No, it's part of how things work. So being in that, lucky enough to be somewhere where I know the government cannot do anything about me speaking against the injustice happening back home, I've been making use of that a lot more from here. And I'm sure a lot of people notice, like, yeah, it's easy for you now to speak that when you're there. Yeah, of course, you should speak that when you're not there, because when I know that prime minister who's more worried about, his book of accomplishments of doing nothing can send every kind of security agency to my house, to my neighbor's house, to friends of mine, to relatives of mine as a form of intimidation. They can't do it here. So of course, I'm going to have a field day with him when he cannot abuse his power to try to shut me up. But
and it's important to mention a couple of things. Sorry to interrupt. First of all, after the onset of the revolution, it became illegal to attack or insult the president or maqam
It's always been.
al-Jamhuriyya.
It's always been. It is a remnant of the French mandate of Lebanon that was never updated. It just became worse under the Syrian regime's occupation, which even though they withdrew their troops in 2005, all the people in power today and ever since maybe like 3-4 decades are the same people who employ the exact same tactics. And you see that filter into everything else. So even TV stations still operate like it's in those times. So in Lebanon, there's a few things that automatically work without anyone having to file a lawsuit. Because usually if I'm sad, I file a lawsuit and I take someone to court. In Lebanon, you don't even have to file a lawsuit if it's about one of the 3 presidents. It just automatically goes in. And we've seen activists of the president, legitimate president's group use that as a tool against a lot of people. And they'll be like, oh, oops, it's the law. I can't do anything about it, when it's not. It's just abusing a outdated law written by foreign powers or occupying powers or powers that had a mandate that you are abusing to attack people who don't have the backing you have or the endless resources to intimidate them.
And another point is also the psychological censorship. So it was almost embedded within our understanding of politics that certain political groups, because they're headed by religious figures, cannot be attacked. And this is probably one of the boundaries that were completely broken with the onset of the revolution in 2019. But until that point, there was no specific law that would prohibit us, not as far as I know, from attacking specific parties or their leaders, such as Hezbollah. Yet it was very taboo. And being able to talk about this, I remember back at university, whenever I had any opinion to voice about this, my friends would just go like, as if, you know, voice your opinion, but don't let anyone hear you. And so the fear that was associated to freedom of speech was not anything that was imposed upon us by any law, but rather on the fear of the consequences, which is a psychological barrier that was completely broken in 2019.
True. And the worst part of this auto-censorship, as someone who's followed that for a long time, is you can't, there's no metrics to track it. So today, if the government bans a movie or a play or an article, I know that they banned it, and that banning will be the story. But if I'll give a innocuous example that isn't political or religious in nature or sectarian. If there's a movie, I'm a movie distributor, and I know that the general security in Lebanon usually censors LGBT scenes or scenes that have to do with Iran or with Saudi Arabia or other foreign regimes that have a lot of influence inside Lebanon, a lot of people doing their bidding there. I would preemptively remove those scenes, for example, in featuring a same-sex couple or something I feel is too raunchy, before even taking it to the General Bureau, the Censorship Bureau of the General Security, which is a military apparatus, security apparatus, an intelligence apparatus that decides on the merits of the linguistic and artistic expression of a lot of Lebanese people. And
Gino, let's talk
I
about
want to
that.
say
Let's
one
talk
thing
about
here
that comedy
because,
and who it consists of and on what basis they do their
because
job.
here I have such a history with covering this and being part of this. Is people have to know this really, where security agents decide on saying, oh, we didn't like the language of this and we didn't feel it represents the reality, giving like an art critics review upon it. But like you said, Riwa, there's no law about this. And that's why they love it so much, why it's still the law since the French mandate, which is like more than 90 years ago, or since the Civil War, when it was just half a page of decision by the cabinet, not even a law by the parliament. It's because it's so vague that you can interpret it the way you want. And one stunt I really appreciate that happened in the early 2010s was a play written about the Censorship Bureau that satirized them. This bureau categorically refused not to let it pass. When the bureau's head changed, and it was supposed to be someone that's a bit more liberal and open, they just used the exact same play and added to it what happened the first time they submitted it. So they meta commentary themselves. It passed without a single word being changed. But the law that they used to either ban or approve it was the exact same one. And even though it's a bit of an absurd stunt, obviously done, it showed the main problem we have, which is it's at the discretion of whoever's interpreting the law what the law is. It's not clear. So what is insulting the president? If I insult how he's doing his work, is that the limit? Or can I not talk about his appearance or his old age? Where's that law? Where does it stand? And unfortunately, usually the interpreters of those laws are assigned, not elected, by those same people. So when you see people like Ghada doing these decisions, of course her decision is going to be marked with her obvious political bias. And that's why you see her detaining minors. I don't say arresting because it's illegal to detain minors. Detaining minors for, insulting the president and other similar things happening. It's because the laws are so unclear, and it's whatever they want it to be. What's nice since 2019 is that I like to say the regime in Lebanon is not really a regime, because it's a ragtag bunch of people abusing laws in ways when it's fitting for them. So it's not like other regimes in the region where like they have hundreds of employees monitoring everything to make sure something is wrong. But if I'm upset with Jana, I can dig up one of her old tweets mentioning someone and give it to one of the many security apparatuses we have in Lebanon, and make a huge deal out of it, even though it's something that didn't really cause a threat to the civil peace, like they always give an excuse. It's probably
and Jana will be invited in for coffee
without telling her the reason. So I don't call them a regime because I don't see it as such. It's a ragtag bunch of people trying to abuse their power as much as possible, because they know that their end is near, and there's no way they can sustain themselves running a country this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this is like, it's a kind of a repetition that we see everywhere, like the whole oppression in different in different levels, in different fields. And I can't stop myself thinking like this can go back to like schools, early school years. Like we can see this oppression even in the systems of the educational systems. And I was wondering, like, Jana, throughout your work as in the youth community committee, how do you bring out this, like, how do you remove the fear that young people have when it comes to the taboo of being in a political party, or even to talk about the political system and the many issues that it has? Like, I see, in my opinion, I see that it comes from the educational system. They have to allow for this expression, even from the students, to allow to listen to each other, for this discussion to have, like, it tackles different aspects that would resolve oppression other than the laws that need to be implemented / written. So what do you think?
I'm gonna speak of my scope of work as within the youth committee. Specifically, what they need as students, as the youth, they kind of are in fear, not only of speaking, they are in fear of what they are going to sacrifice in front of because of speaking out. So what they need is actually, for example, I'm going to give you an example for you to understand more what I'm speaking of. Like, for example, AUB, when they raised the tuition fees to 3,900 Lebanese liras instead of 1,500. So the students started talking, and they started telling them, if you don't, you're gonna be kicked out. That was the main narrative of the university. But then when they all actually stood all together and they went to the with the legal part of it, and they paid on the other rate with the help of the community, the whole community that went, students and not even students, went to the protest. And whenever they had like people supporting them within and guiding them to pursue what they were talking about, they're gonna feel more empowered to speak about it. And that's what they need. They need a community that actually empowers them and kind of supports them to, yes, and that tells them, if you think that way and you have you're convinced that this is the right way to do it, then go with it. that's one of the examples of how or what the youth specifically need within the universities in order to speak out more and continue with whatever they're doing. But when it comes to them joining other political parties and etc., that's a whole different thing, because you need to redefine what is the culture of being part of a political party and how an actual political party works. Because we've been what we had is not, if I say it, people will hate me for it, but I think there are cults more of political parties. So this is very different than that, and we have a long way to go. But they are the main, as I say, they are the main warriors, because they don't have a lot, but they go the extra mile to get a lot. So yeah.
But then, what about the change that has happened post 2019? Because we know that universities across Lebanon, all to some extent, have different political parties that are either more powerful than others, have more students, have more representatives on the student councils, and these really run the universities and take the decisions. So in certain universities, to access certain services, you have to be politically affiliated to be able to reach a certain person in a position of authority to be able to access that service. And there are some changes that have happened over the past few years since the onset of the revolution, because people started becoming more vocal about this. You started seeing campaigns taking place online, either through independent platforms or political activists such as yourselves, who started becoming more vocal about this. And so people who felt more powerful in their positions really started being able to practice this less and give fewer services. And so how do you place the emphasis on freedom of speech and its importance among students being able to practice their own freedom of speech, access services, and just be able to have their student experience, and also being able to convey their own opinion and practice their freedom of speech and be activists in the universities to which they're affiliated? And how do you see this mostly after the revolution?
It actually it changed a lot. For example, in NDU, we've never had a secular club, which we had it recently in the past year. Most of the secular clubs became more active in most of the universities, and they're doing an amazing job. Starting from LAU, AUB, going to and not only the secular clubs, but there's also CSH in AUB, which is a club that rose after the October 17. So to highlight this, I just want to highlight how the youth, if you want, they became more vocal against the system and against the representatives and the groups of the political parties that are within the clubs under different names. They are not allowed to be under their name, their political party name. Some are under another name that they like Discovery or etc. They have very different names. So yeah. So they
University X Development Club.
No,
Yeah,
but you know, the funny part is when the same political party, the different political parties choose the same name in a different university.
Yes.
So a debate club would be something in one university and one in the other. And
yeah, exactly.
I think it's completely fine, because now I know that all the political parties and institutional one will be said, oh, you want to cancel us? No, but you cannot use your extra privileges that you have acquired without the student body choosing to ensure the results firsthand. You definitely can run, and you did run, and you lost everywhere, because for once you couldn't tip the scales in your direction, and second, people had hope. So no matter how much you tell them, oh, it's over, nothing will ever change, they saw that it is possible. And wherever people were given a choice, each and every single time, no matter how big the odds were against them, chose change over this horrible sulta, what we prefer to call instead of regime. So yeah, akid, they can definitely still always run. You just can't cheat anymore.
Yes, and I just have one thing to say, that they became more vocal on the practice of the actual old student council. Yani they used to tell them, come vote for me, I will give you the test banks, for example. And this became very, when the opposition became very vocal about it, guys, you can access, I don't know, you can do this without their idea of being helpful to you.
They're bribes.
You
even.
just
Yeah,
need good
bribe.
piracy skills.
Exactly. So
No,
this
it's not
became
even.
very,
It's like previous exams that should be publicly available. It's not.
Exactly.
You're not stealing intellectual property.
exactly. So this is very different. And they're kind of redefining the practice of politics within the small entities that they have, which is the student bodies at the university, and they are actually politicizing themselves. They have a political narrative that they use and they spread, and they are very strict about it, but it's still very oppressive in many other universities, because some of them, they don't have actual elections, with like the Lebanese university, and for example Ballot or etc. It's not only the Lebanese and state universities, it's also liberal universities.
The problem is with Lebanese
Exactly.
university that's supposed to not include religion or etc. You see the sectarianism seeping into it
Exactly.
because of each and what's nice about the LU is that it's not a unified campus in one place.
No.
They made sure that each sectarian warlord has his own part, and they each operate differently. So one, you can give wine out in a celebration or in a symposium. Another, you cannot. One, you can put music with that's westernized. One, you cannot.
Can we please
And
talk
it's
about
not
the
only-
censorship of Fayrouz? Fayrouz
Yeah.
got censored.
Yeah, it's not only related on the way they actually they divided the Lebanese university campuses is also based on where they are more powerful as political parties. So this also reflects how the division that they do implement everywhere, wherever they go. But within the Lebanese university, if you visit some campuses, you feel like you're going to مكتب للحزب الله or مكتب للقوات or etc. That's the reality how it is. And these they do actually because the Lebanese university access to multiple cultures and to multiple people from different backgrounds, so it's a very strong place where they can recruit many of the youth, where they can target, and they can actually recruit them based on the fact that they will facilitate their life, because our life is very difficult at the Lebanese university, to be very clear. So this is also reflected itself on how it's different. But lately, after the revolution, we have the LU Secular Club, which is something very big, specifically for me. I'm also a member of it, which is very big because the idea of secularism is very important, and to actually have a club within a Lebanese university that is actually willing to work against all the political parties mafia within the university, it's a long way to go, even though they don't have elections, but it's a very long way to go, because they are all standing with each other. Specifically what happened, for example, with the med student lately in the Lebanese university, so they are all standing by each other, and this is mostly they feel more empowered.
So you look at public universities, which have gained really high ranking across the world, and you see people traveling from all over the world to be able to join these universities, and these are usually reflective of the success of the states, because the more you can successfully run these, the more their programs can improve, and they can start being more inclusive and attracting students from all over the world. And so when you look at Lebanese university and the way it has failed, at least locally, if we talk locally in university rankings, you see that this is a university with a ranking that is significantly lower than other private universities. You see the way that it is run by political parties and their student representatives. You see the way that its directors are affiliated with certain political parties, and the way that if you want to access any service, you need to be politically affiliated. And it shows you just how much the university in itself has started failing as an establishment. And so seeing clubs like the LU Secular Club being on the rise at the moment, seeing the idea of secularism becoming less stigmatized, and the idea of secularism, which people are starting to become a lot more comfortable with, and which somehow used to be taboo in the past, because secularism was somehow wrongly associated to atheism. And so you look at something like this and the rise of the secular wave across all universities in Lebanon. And we have some success stories, such as the Lebanese American University, the American University in Beirut, perhaps not NDU, but then also seeing a secular club on the rise at the Lebanese University is such a success story that to me, it is the idea of being able to talk about these ideas without them being taboo, being able to express your thoughts, and also compare that to the system in Lebanon, because truly it is a solution. The solutions to the problems in the country have started in the universities. And so seeing these secular clubs on the rise gives you an idea about how this, which used to be stigmatized in the past, is starting to become the solution to several of the establishment's problems.
It's very different, and so it's also related to freedom of speech, how they are freely being able to express and talk more and spread more the culture of secularism. I just want to correct something. In AUB specifically, it was a win-win for both opposition because it was CSH and secular. So that's also something very important.
CSH
no more
for
parties.
CSH
Change starts here.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are all very important aspects, and this is one of the things, Masan. Let's take AUST as an example. It does not allow political groups or clubs to be created, and there are no elections. And the clubs that are there, they're for activities. So there's not really a space for people to have clubs and kind of be active in it in order to prepare themselves to be activists, let's say, in the society. What are the challenges that you personally went through, and what are the risks other than being oppressed by the government in certain aspects? If you'd like, what did you go through? Gino, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Ayel, and I think that's an important thing to mention. A lot of universities in Lebanon are universities for profit, so they're there to make money, which is why they've tried to stay away from letting people do things like organize and collectively bargain. Obviously, it's not good for a university that's the Kene, what we call in Lebanon, which is just to give diplomas and send them off to work abroad and send money back here. And
What's
even
the
more,
in English?
the Kene is like a bodega, like a bodega or a deli, but not in a good way. So it's like, it's just a transactional thing where you don't really focus on the level of education you're getting, just that these people are paying money to do. And at the end of the day, it's the discretion of these private for-profit companies if they want to do this or not. So I don't think that's what we should change. But what's interesting is to see universities that don't necessarily fit into the sectarian boxes. So LEU for a long time was that when it was just one campus in Beirut, the capital, where everyone had access to it. And it's known to be more accepting of people from different classes versus more elite schools like EUB. But what was nice about EUB is that the campus is in Beirut, and their acceptance policy, even though it's opaque, tries to mirror how the Lebanese community actually is. So it has the same percentage of each kind of community being accepted there. So there's no overall majority that someone from outside the university can just call and say, I want these guys to win. When LEU split its campuses, and depending on Haida, it shows in how their elections are run. So it's almost impossible without political influence from outside the campus, who are probably helping them with financial aid, helping them get accepted, blah, 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 all this stuff playing in. AUB, it's so much harder. So even before October 17, before that time when I was still at AUB, it was impossible for one side to win all, because students, the law was better and how you vote. It wasn't all or none. And two, the students know that they want to vote for someone that helps them, not just the person that gives them a phone recharge card. And now Jana's mentioning that they give them previews. It shows you how much political parties are also struggling, because when I was in AUB, it used to be like $50 recharge cards for your phones. And as a student, are still paying per megabyte for WhatsApp on your BBM, BlackBerry. It was quite the bribe that could win. So that's the problem, I think, with a lot of universities. So what's important is, even if they didn't win, even if they don't have elections, the fact that they cannot stifle these stuff anymore says a lot. So they can do a million things for an election that isn't free and fair and opaque. But what they can't do is stop people from collectively bargaining. And that for me is important enough. I don't really care about the internal politics, which coalition won where. What's important to me is that the ruling sectarian parties don't have a chokehold anymore. And I don't see it going back.
Activism as a culture, how can you teach it? How can you tell people that it's better? I know it's a hard road and it's a long road to go through, but you have to go through it in order to be able to make the change in your country. Like, how would you move forward with that? How do you tell them, like, there are limits? You can't go that far. Maybe are there limits for activism? Are there limits for you speaking up? When are you supposed to listen to another person? Are there any people who don't have the freedom of speech kind of right? Like, what do you think?
If I may add something to that question, Jana, you mentioned something earlier today. You said the personal is the political. So basing on that and knowing that culturally, with the way that so many taboos have been broken across the past few years, and the way that the political used to be a bit exclusive in Lebanon, and then after that, you just had this massive wave of people who started considering the political personal and seeing how the personal is being steered by a certain ruling elite in the country, in which personal has also become lack of access to resources, to basic services, to basic human rights, and that political activism is basically demanding your rights and demanding better living conditions. So knowing the fact that over the past few years, the political became the most common and popular, and then you just started having so much more involvement in it. Do you still believe that there's any limit to it? What is the limit? We see a political leader come up on TV and say, don't you dare be impolite, or don't you do this or that. And then you have a law that prohibits us from attacking or even giving any personal negative opinions on the president. And then you also have, Gino, maybe you could talk about that, which is basically a reason, what is that in English? Which is basically the reason that so many activists are being interrogated on no basis. What is the limit? And do you believe that there should be any limit on the usage of foul language, which perhaps Gino could also
slander and libel
about.
in English?
Yes.
Slander and libel laws are like the censorship laws. They're pretty vague, so it depends on the judge, trying to decipher that. Like all the other laws in Lebanon, like when LGBTQ community was, targeted for a long time. The same laws were used to exonerate others when you had more liberal and open-minded judges instead of the usual patriarchal, ultra-conservative ones. I don't think there's ever a limit, but I also don't think activism is like a major that should be taught to people. I think it's the natural progression of any community that sees something not doing well, that they can do better for their entire community. They should do it always, as long as, and here the inevitable question that you always hear in Lebanon about whether you should use violence or not for a population that has been either occupied or living in a wartime for most of our, at least recorded memory that we know of ourselves. My argument to that is there's so many other ways you can do it, and this specific way for the ruling sectarian war criminals, all of them, is their expertise. So no one is better than them. And you see some of them using their prowess at killing and destroying and other horrible things being used in neighboring countries like Syria, like Iraq. So no, a bunch of young people with a lot of hopes will not win violently against a hardened group of transnational terrorist groups and militant organizations with a lot more. So it's a fight you will never win, one, if we want to talk pragmatically, and two, it's not the kind of people we want to be. I don't want to be a guy that is happy about killing others or blowing up a residential neighborhood or making fun that I can kill whoever I want and you can't do anything about it. That's not the kind of person I want to be. And that's not the only way you can beat these warlords and war criminals in power today. It's a pretty conservative society in a lot of parts, and I don't mean pious as in they actually God fearing and practice their religion, in that the aib, which is the shame factor, plays a big role in all the decisions people make. So every single human being in Lebanon curses every day, at least the leaders they don't like. But to see it go in public is the problem. And I see that from my surrounding. But for me, it has been a pretty prominent, unfortunately, part of most of my activism since the Torah in 2019, because it was an active decision taken on purpose by me to try and break the sanctity that they have, which they used to impose either with the slander and libel silliness that they used to do, or trying to intimidate the people doing it. When it was an entire population doing that, you can never go back from that. They can't arrest and kill everyone like they usually do. So I don't think there should be limits on that, of course, unless it's actually encroaching on someone else's rights. And here, and that's extremely important, encroaching on your rights doesn't mean you feeling offended. You take offense. No one gives you offense. You can, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, your rights are completely fine. That's what a lot of them here use. الحرية تنتهي عند حد حرية الغير, and they think that means if you're offended. No, you can be offended. That's your own problem. So I don't think there's a limit unless you're actually hurting someone physically, doxing them and encouraging people to go kill them, or sharing their personal information like their phone number, like Aunistan and Hezbollah do with mine. And all,
Which
not
has
knowing,
happened to you
not,
several
not knowing
times.
I changed my number several times, and they're just trolling themselves. And once I actually did share Gibran Basil's number and saying it's my number, so they would call him, and I would have loved to see his face getting calls from angry 70-plus-year-old Aunists, cursing mothers, blah, 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 thinking it's me, when it's actually their own leader doing that. So no, there is no limit as long as you don't actually hurt someone, hurt their business, hurt their livelihood, especially when they're a private citizen. When you're a politically exposed person, it's part of the deal. Sorry about that. You have no personal life. This isn't like a TV show where you can be the prime minister, but you want to go party in peace while you order people out of their homes, evicted, or go
or
in jail.
Minister of Interior in that case, if we're talking about parties,
or someone, anyone involved politically, or the people benefiting from that directly or indirectly. Sorry, you don't get that private citizen card. No, a private citizen does. Yeah, you don't. I'm paying you. I decide what happens to you, especially when you don't keep up your end of the bargain. I pay my taxes. I get nothing in return. So not a single minister or any appointed or elected official has any umbrella over their head. They need to accept the criticism. And the fact that all of them have such a thin skin goes to show you how inadequate and inept they are as humans, where the first thing a minister just assigned sends the first memo he sends in a country drenched in darkness with no fuel, being imported illegally and smuggled, then resold by Hezbollah. The first memo this guy sends, underlined and bold, call me doctor, and he's not even an MD or something where you need to identify the person as a doctor. It doesn't need. Imagine how fragile these egos are, and it goes to show you that a lot of them are like the former Prime Minister Hassan Diab, who was Prime Minister when the August 4 blast happened. They are extremely fragile ego people, and to pummel them where it hurts most, which is their fragile masculinity, most of them, is a very good way to destroy the halo that created for themselves, whether it's Hassan Nasrallah, Michel Aoun, or all their underlings that feel that they're entitled to that. And you see that a lot in Lebanon, even if it's like a very local official, they always need like 6-7 armored cars to drive them around and block traffic. I'm like, what's wrong with you, man?
And on the importance of activism, on the importance of activism in the examples that you have previously mentioned. The same minister was in Hamra having a drink a couple of nights ago at the same time where I don't have electricity in my own house. So while the entire city and the entire country is drowning in darkness, they are out having drinks and having a good time. And the problem was really with him getting kicked out. So a couple of nights ago, he was kicked out of the pub in which he was having a drink. And this is where I really emphasize, and I'm so happy with some of the impacts of the revolution after its onset. It's that most of these people can no longer go out using public funds, enjoy their lives, while other people cannot access the most basic human rights, which if these same ministers were doing their jobs, we would not be having these problems. So on one side, there's some extent of shamelessness in coming up on an interview and saying it takes two to tango on why you have not been doing your own job. Then seeing the entire country drown in darkness and still having the audacity to go out for a drink and then be offended when you're getting kicked out.
Still
So
better
on
than
freedom
the
of
current
speech,
PM.
allow
Yeah,
me
okay.
to talk about the importance of some social media platforms. We've previously mentioned Megaphone, but then also Thawra Map. The work that Thawra Map have been doing, which is mostly like what damage is done when you're talking about where certain politicians are spending their time. And then activists, and there lies the importance of activism, will be going to these places and basically just shouting what these people have been doing. So a couple of nights ago in that pub, most of what was said was, you don't get to be here while we drown in darkness. And that was it. That was enough to kick the guy out. Now, shortly after he was kicked out, the internal security forces shut down the place. Now, I think this is where we will keep talking about censorships and consequences in cases where we completely and openly express our opinions. So we've spoken about challenges and risks in universities. We spoke about them under laws like Qat'u Zam, what is it again, Gino?
Slander and libel.
Slander and libel. Are there any other risks? Because we know that until not a long time in the past, there was also, again, as I mentioned earlier, the taboo of talking about specific figures or specific parties. And so there are several instances that we know of where people were kidnapped and then they would return back home a few days later. And these are very known instances. Then also after 2019, there was the instance in which FPM kidnapped someone. And then there was pictures of him with a bag on his head in a car. Basically for doing what? Can you remind me, Gino or Jana?
Removing the president.
Removing the picture of the president from a place. And so we want to talk about Lebanon as being a country that fostered freedom of speech. And that was also the ground for having an art scene that flourished at a certain point. Because when you have a country which, at least until some point in the past, empowers certain people to express their opinions, to exist, such as the LGBTQ+ community, then you're also creating fertile grounds for arts, for theater, music, movie production, where when these are uncensored, you're really creating quality productions and portraying a certain image of the country as being one in which you can prosper through freedom of speech. And then we look at over the past few years how that has been on the decline again. People have been getting arrested for their tweets. While on the other hand, a guy gets shot in the car in front of his kids. And then that as an investigation is completely wrapped up. An explosion takes place in the port in which until this moment, there are over 270 dead people. Please correct me on the number. I remember it was 170 right after the explosion. And then that number has been on the increase until now.
218 found.
218.
There's a few
dead,
missing there.
Dead until now. And so you look at investigations
Confirmed.
like these that are completely, that hit at that end. And then you look at Gino receiving, it's not a warrant, what is it? Or Hiba.
Summons.
Hiba Nandashli was summoned at some point. You have people like Lucien Bourjaili. Please help me a bit more with the name.
Hiba was summoned because she was protesting peacefully with a few others when me and Taimur were detained for kicking out the ex-minister of environment, Fadi Jiraisati. Actually, we didn't even kick him out. When he found out we were on our way, he was already running. We caught him on the sidewalk.
Yeah. And what's the name of the guy who escaped from the restaurant? by running
Raidy
on the
Jaraisati.
rocks.
But
It was
Ziad
the same guy.
Aswad. Ziad Aswad. That
No.
was my favorite one because his whole shtick is that he's, you know, a tough guy, a wise guy. He thinks he's in
Yes.
Sopranos. That
My
he can
favorite is
go
Nohad
up
El
and
Masnou
stuff.
on flying first class and watching the posts of Taura map to know who's following him.
It was Ziad Aswad, and the worst thing that Ziad Aswad did is that his men actually beat up a young man from Tripoli, asking him, "What are you doing
What are you
here
doing
in
here?"
Jounieh, which is a majority Christian population, versus Tripoli being a majority Sunni population?" And circulating that video everywhere. And the worst part is, Gibran Basil, which is the master of Ziad Aswad, sued me and Dima Sadiq, prominent Lebanese journalist, for saying what they did, accusing us of inciting sectarian strife, when his own thug minister of parliament, who ran away from a bunch of tweens yelling at him only, jumped out of a window, then got a young man from Tripoli, beat him up on camera, humiliated him, then disseminated in their corners. And when we called them out for that, Gibran Basil sent, please, I need to say the full name of the bureau, Central Intelligence Forensic Bureau, which sounds, you know, like you know, I'm a ISIS terrorist and they're coming down, because we said, how could you do that, you sectarian? I'm not gonna say the curse words now. Imagine how not just petty and evil they are, how rude they are. And this is exactly what your entire political career is based upon, raising sectarian tensions, to then use it to try to intimidate journalists and activists trying to call you out for this, after everyone's fed up of you in the midst of the hela ho whole beautiful moment of Lebanon's time. Too much. And I think they're noticing that, which is why they're trying so hard, now that they feel that the street protests die down, to try to rein in the freedom of speech that I don't think they ever can anymore, thanks to things like people chasing them out from public areas. Najib Miati, a billionaire who's already corruption cases in Africa and the Far East, wants to do even more, cried on TV because he can't go to a restaurant when he has taken billions of dollars in what's supposed to be housing aid to buy his own buildings, a few luxury apartments in the own buildings that he made. So he was using public money to finance enriching himself, and was crying because he can't go out without people yelling at him.
And who can then be appointed as prime minister? And who can then be appointed as prime minister again?
I call him the spare. I call him the Hezbollah spare tire. Whenever everything is a disaster, like after Hariri's assassination, they couldn't find anyone who was willing to, and after they did that to Sanyura and Hariri, Miati was the spare. Now they went through all of them, if you guys remember Adib, and there were like 4 or 5 others other than Hassan Diab that didn't work out. Then now when I read their names, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Then they get the spare out, Najib Miati, who pretends he's angry, blah, 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 then does the ruling regime's, the ruling sultan's bidding. So he is the extremely tall spare tire of this crumbling sultan.
I want to just highlight something that's because of people like Gino, and they انكسر حاجز الخوف بطريقة مش طبيعية. So saying curse words for the Hezbollah or etc., it became something normal, and it became something that we should be doing. And in fact, it's not about just speaking out about what they did. It's about the fact that now they are not only following them to to where they are in a public place, but also to their houses. I want to highlight what happened with Tariq Merabi's house after the explosion of the 15th of August in Akkad. So this shows mostly how, to go back to the person is political. If you're not gonna be doing your job, you're not gonna be okay.
Yeah, I'm like, all of this is a lot. I feel like we can talk about this forever. So I have a question though. So as freedom of expression, let's say, more than freedom of speech. It's more like a freedom of expression. So we talked about how different it got from before 2019 and after. I was wondering, for the international community and the local community, like what can be done in order to kind of empower the activism in Lebanon, pointing out to the fact that activism does not only mean work on the ground and kicking people out of the restaurants and just protesting, because activism, apparently for now, for many people, this is what activism is. And many don't know the different aspects of activism. So for the both of you, like what are the different types of activism that people can like take part in, and what can the international community or the diaspora even do in order to help the local community, and what the local community needs from the international one?
And adding to what Aya is saying, and to re-emphasize the purpose of these episodes, which is everything that happens beyond elections, because everybody keeps talking about the importance of elections. Whenever you ask anyone, what can you do? What can we do as a local community? The answer is always, do not vote for the same people. But that is only a part of it. If you look at the past few years, 2019 onwards, pretty much every single time we needed the support of the international community or we needed to do something on the local level, there was so much to be done that was beyond the elections. The parliament has still been the same. The MPs have still been the same. And yet, after the revolution, there was so much support that came from the international community. After the Beirut blast, there was aid that came from the international community, which we would not have been able to do without. But then also at the same time, all the disaster relief work that happened on the ground was the local community. I'd like to hear of a single MP or a single minister who offered any kind of aid to the victims of the Beirut port blast. And yet, seeing the independent initiatives, people who left their homes despite being injured and went down on the streets and helped other people. Those who stayed in the night to guard the houses that were shattered so they're not stolen at night. Those who conducted campaigns abroad to bring in aid to Lebanon. Those who shed the light on acts of corruption happening in Lebanon and the way that the aid was being distributed, etc., etc. There is so much underrated emphasis that the local community, NGOs, opposition parties, and independent initiatives, like there's so much work that was done that is really, that goes much past voting. Yes, of course, it's important to vote correctly and to know the person that you're voting for and to know that they can make a change. But there's also so many initiatives that have taken place locally and internationally to help the local community that need to have more light shed on them. And so to reiterate Aya's question, what is it that you think the international community can help Lebanon with in terms of freedom of speech and to support with that? What do you think the local community can do in terms of activism to keep pushing their work forward? Where do you think there have been gaps? Where should there be space for improvement? And what is it that you think the local community and the international community have succeeded with so far? So in terms of activism and how vast that is, where do you think the communities can help each other and what can be done?
Okay, that's a great question, especially since a lot of the aid that funneled into Lebanon, which is definitely not nearly enough from the damage caused by the August 4 blast. What was interesting is that we saw for the first time the same international donors, especially Western powers, whether it's Europe, the States, Canada, and others who have funded the Lebanese establishment for so many years, finally realized that that money, their taxpayers' money, was going into private bank accounts hidden offshore, as we saw in the Pandora papers and the Panama paper, everywhere. So a lot of them, of course, there's a lot of exceptions that happened where they directly gave to the government, like you see the IMF, the World Bank, etc. Some rigid governments did, but others didn't. They gave international trusted partners or local partners that have things like auditing, someone checking what's happening, where the money is going, not just giving the government money and it evaporating. Because I think that is extremely important, both for the local activists and the diaspora, Lebanese diaspora abroad, because one, your money, the money coming from the politicians and the sectarian warlords don't use their own money to bribe people. They use the funding coming from abroad. They always try to dress it up as them becoming more progressive and more, about gender equality, about freedom of speech, about blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, they're appropriating it in the wrong place. So for people abroad, other than all the support you're giving Lebanese people every day who are still there, residents in Lebanon, you can talk to your own representatives in your adopted countries or where you reside, if you can, of course, if the laws in that place where of your residence allows that. Talk to them, talk to your members of parliament, talk to your senators, talk to your Congress people, make them understand what's happening in Lebanon and how their taxpayers, their constituents' taxes are being used for the wrong plan. Because if your money is going there, what do I have to do with Lebanon? No, even your community, no matter how far it is, part of that money might find its way to the wrong people in Lebanon, which will add to the suffering of Lebanese people. And we've seen that with sanctions done, even though meddling by other countries and internal affairs of another is always frowned upon. But when that same country is the one funding those people, they can have a say in it. And so far, the effects we've seen on proven corrupt politicians in Lebanon has been astounding in terms of how much they're willing to flaunt this corruption. We saw how Gibran Bassil now hides with his associates all the money after he was sanctioned by the treasury. We saw how figures like Fenji, which was extremely vocal all his time, having his right-hand man, Finianos, which was minister of public works when the port issue happened, or in the lead up to it, when he knew about the 2,700 tons of explosives there and did nothing. You didn't hear a single peep out of them. Even Hezbollah's extremely heated rhetoric against the occupation of Palestine, all that stuff about wiping off Zionism, etc. We saw them, their puppet government, sitting down with Israeli delegations to negotiate how they will demarcate the land border, the sea border between Lebanon and occupied Palestine. So imagine how much, or Amir Fakhouri, but they will always use, but the US released another one as an excuse to justify that. But a judge appointed by Hezbollah released the butcher of Khiyam, which is a person responsible for committing the most heinous torture and murder and industrialized murder of Lebanese people. They released him after being caught because of a proposed draft bill by Ted Cruz and the US Senate, a bill which would have never passed if it went to vote. But imagine if your representative where you are just sheds a bit of light, it can have an extreme impact, because no matter what big titles they give, we want to liberate, blah, 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 we are standing against corruption, we are, at the end of the day, if the money that is feeding their pot that they are bribing you with stops, they will stop also. No one is buying the rhetoric they're selling anymore. And you see that. You don't see their poetic speeches written in Fusha anymore. You see them trying to look like the average Joe, I'm wearing a t-shirt and I'm working with you guys, and I'm planting seeds, Gibran Bassil and Nasrallah telling people to, who needs agriculture? Just use your balcony to grow food. It's fine if there's no food. Now you see it with the other bribe that they're using, which is Bita'a Tamuni, which is the ration card, which is, for people don't know, it's a very successful World Food Program in Lebanon and other countries that helps refugees get food assistance. That's negligible, almost $20 or something a month, but as a debit card that they can actually go use and have some sense of normalcy instead of just go buy, get all your donations at once. When the same thing was going to be implemented for Lebanon's most at-risk families. But of course, this should have happened early last year, even before the pandemic. It still hasn't now, because it won't last till the elections. This is going to be used as a bribe for the the most in need Lebanese people. And of course, they're not going to give from the money they've stolen and hidden abroad that we've seen so many. And now with Lebanon is a country of 4 or 5 million, and we had the most names on the Pandora Papers hiding offshore assets. Just imagine, versus countries with 1 billion or 1.5 billion people. A country of 5 million was among the top, and it included 3 prime ministers in our lifetimes. Just imagine the level of corruption. So one way diaspora can help, other than the immense help that they've been sending, whether it's medicine, whether it's food, whether it's reconstruction after the blast, is be active in your own communities where you actually live, and canvass, campaign, email, call your representatives, tell them to care, because even a tweet by them can make the problems in Lebanon, alleviate them a bit. They won't solve them. Sanctions won't solve anything, even if they're all sanctions. But now they'll think twice. Jabran Basir will think twice, 3 times, especially if he can't deal with the international banking system anymore. Corruption will be much harder now. He'll have to probably get it in cash dollars delivered to him, because he can't actually access all the perks that they always used to do. So that's one thing that will help a lot, that I don't feel, other than everything being done, of course, not to say that not a lot of help has been coming. It's never enough because of the huge damage that this Sulta has done on Lebanon. It's, even if it's in the billions in aid, it won't be enough for the damage they've done. And it's not just money. Like, the people that left are leaving Lebanon now in the 3rd mass exodus in the modern history of Lebanon after the Ottoman Empire and the Civil War in the 70s and 80s. These people aren't going to come back, even if tomorrow all 128 MPs and all the ministers and all the presidents disappear off the face of the earth. It won't get back to normal. A lot of the, really special surgeons, for example, where it was 1 or 2 people in Lebanon that could actually do it, they're not coming back from the countries that welcome them now. So this is gone forever. All the creatives that were creating a lot of the great content in Arabic, that 700 million Arab consumers would love to watch on TV, would love to watch on on demand, they're probably not going to come back. And you see this shift even in successful brands in Lebanon migrating to countries that are more hospitable for business, whether it's the UAE, whether it's other countries like Turkey, whether even countries in the EU, like Greece or Cyprus, which are pretty close. You see them successfully doing that change. And these people will probably never come back again after that. Why would they? To come with no electricity, to not be able to complete a call, to have to give a part of 51% of your shares of your company to the wife of the Speaker of Parliament. Why would they come back? So,
or to even
elections, like
your
you
own
said,
freedom whenever you want to express your opinion on any subject.
Definitely,
The deterioration
maybe
of the value of the currency.
Maybe a CEO doesn't care about the freedoms that much. They care about making money, but even that they can't really
So
do.
when the local currency has lost over 95% of its value, a doctor used to get paid about, let's say, an average of $100, $50 to $100 per consultation, which right now would be worth, what, $2, $3, $5 tops. So at this point, I think it is a massive brain drain. And those who are left in the country and those who will be left are those who are unable to leave, either due to educational challenges or because they have other challenges that force them to stay. And with the lack of access to the basic resources that usually help us stay here, electricity, internet, phone coverage, I think at this point, the country is entirely doomed to further deterioration until the point where this is entirely out of control, which I would argue it already is.
And you mentioned the elections part, and that's something I want to touch up a bit on, because a lot of our view on a lot of things, I feel is kind of like a Netflix episode length. So we think if we do a big enough protest for a specific number of times, or like a video game, actually, we will win. It's not how it works. It's never how it works anywhere in history, anywhere in the world. So You'd hear stuff like, if we get into parliament and stay X amount of weeks, it means automatically the government goes away. I'm like, it's not, no, it doesn't work like that. But our need to have that lets a lot of people, and I don't blame them, they're absolutely right. Elections are the bedrock of everything we want in a democratic, equal society. But it's not the only thing. So for people that are putting their entire hopes on the May 2022 election, and I will decide if I leave or stay, or if there's hope or not, you're kind of giving a bet that you know you're gonna lose, because one, it's not a free and fair elections. It's an election run by people like Hariri, On, Berri, Jumblat, Nasrallah.
Yeah.
It's never been free and fair.
Using a law that serves the same purpose.
Not even, a lot of it is illegal. They don't really care about the law. And we saw that in 2018 when there wasn't this public outroar, and we saw how many violations and how many ballot stuffing incidents happened. This time it's gonna be a million times more.
And the
that's for
gerrymandering.
sure. That's a given, and the law that was engineered to make sure unpopular local fiefdoms like Jumblat or Jubran Basil actually win. Jubran Basil lost every election in his life till they stopped elections for 10 years, put him in every ministry possible that he can give services to, and engineered a law to make sure he would win till he finally won. Jubran Basil never held elected office before he was appointed as the king-elect of under On, after On started deteriorating when it comes to his age and inability to serve his office that we pay him to do. But
so in terms of activism,
so it can't be
that
just
can be done from abroad and locally.
It can't be about that. It has to be everything. So a good example is of a problem that this government or all of this system has not been able to do is solve the solid waste management. And everyone can remember the 2015 garbage crisis, where Lebanon was literally drowning in garbage and rivers and seas of garbage that were burning, desolating natural reserves.
But we became famous.
Unfortunately, and there's nothing that's now out of sight, out of mind. They just expanded the haphazard landfills. That's all they did. And I'm talking about Mount Lebanon and Beirut. We don't even know what each of the rural communities is doing, where a lot of it is just burning or throwing them into forests and lakes and stuff like that. You see how toxic the Litani River is, for example. But a lot of local initiatives, you see them, are coming together to solve this. So you have a lot of municipalities coming together and pooling their limited resources that the central government doesn't take, to create an alternative. This is good. Why? Because people will not believe you for a nice platform, because we hear it a lot. It's like, if we have nice plans, people will go vote for you. No, people don't go vote for a plan. They vote for either their personal experience with you, or your track record, a real one, or something more emotional, like, I want to be the Kilon Yani Kilon. I don't want these people. I would literally vote for anything else as long as it's not Jubran Basil or blah blah blah. The people that you feel that people feel caused all of this. So a big part of activism is actually making a tangible improvement in people's lives, and that is possible. And now you're seeing that show because of the severe energy crisis. You're seeing a lot of people invest in renewables to try to offset the deal that's not being kept up by the central government of actually providing these. So unfortunately, a lot of them are personal initiatives or haphazard ones, or a very localized campaign for a while. But we know for sure that gensets that include some diesel generators and a lot of solar panels can work. And there's a few small Lebanese towns that have already implemented that, and that's even before the Thawra. It was, some of them were UNDP projects, some of them were EU projects, but they work in the real world. We know they do. So we don't need to wait for the central government that will always be controlled in one way or another. If we can't actually change it in the ballot box, we can just replace it. And I have, after the Thawra, after the protest, after that, I know a lot of people think that's the only solution. And I'm one of them. I've protested so much in my life, more than I would like to accept, especially like, and when I go to Beirut, this is what I remember. Which protest here, who got beaten up here, blah, blah, blah. Who did we save from getting detained there? And it's annoying that a lot of the significant memories are about that, but that did its part. We know we're a majority, if not a sizable part of the country who want it. The problem is the implementation, which we cannot do in parliament yet. We probably will start doing that in May 2022 if the powers that be allow it to happen, but it can't be the only one. And there's a toolbox of so many other things. One of them is municipalities. We can go to municipalities, even if we're not voted there, and propose to them our ideas to solve the issues of each area, each locality, because a voter that has a landfill in front of him doesn't care about updating, I don't know what law about culture and art. They care about who is gonna, take this cancerous thing in front of my house and how. So I will fashion something, a fair solution to that and implement it, and let the central government come and try to force you to stop it, which is what they try to do. But I'd like to see them do it after October 17th. No, they won't now. If I provide clean energy to a town without going through EDL and using their power lines, and they can come tell me this is illegal, I'll tell them, what about the motor, the generators in each neighborhood? Aren't they using the grid of EDL? Isn't that illegal too? Why don't you stop them? Because they're getting it, but if it's not their people. Our problem is we're not
One of their tricks for this is with the solar panels. They're now demanding licenses for them, which also now takes you through the same system of having to bribe people, of accessing.
To see a cop go to a town and try to remove the solar panels. I would like to see.
That's a very big issue, because you're not supposed to have a license.
Sir,
like
and you're not,
it's allowed.
And the DL is supposed to give me 24 hours. So if this is a contract between two people, they have breached it. And I would love to see, after everything now that happened, that they will send the police Darak to stop someone from having electricity because they don't have a permit. I would love to see that, because they haven't stopped it for 30 years for the illegal generators poisoning us with diesel in every neighborhood in Lebanon. Lebanon has sulfur dioxide levels in the air, as you've seen in AUB's
NCC with Dr.
I love her. She was my professor in AUB. More than some industrial parts of China. It's the same. It's comparable to that one. It's literally a city of maybe 1.5 million people maximum a day. Factor in those. It's all the diesel generators. So you need to step up. We've gotten used to, unfortunately, a lot of in my lifetime, at least in Lebanon, a lot of the politics has been making excuses. So when you had the 8 March, 14 March, you always had the excuse. 14 March, we can't do anything. There's the Syrian forces occupation. Or there's the Hezbollah weapons. So that's why I need to force you to not have good internet connection on your. Hey, what does the weapons have to do with not stealing the money to do a proper 4G antenna? It has unrelated. And Jubra, they didn't let me, I tried. Hezbollah, it's Israel, it's a conspiracy by all the West to destroy our society, blah, blah.
They didn't let me while being behind over 50% of the local debt.
And having over 50%, a majority in part, not 50%, a majority in parliament, and a majority of all the cabinets since, and they didn't let you. All of their political careers are based on failing. All of them fail for different reasons. One, it's a Iranian excuse. One, it's America and imperialism. They all have excuses. None of them have action. They just spend a bit of money ahead of the elections. And people who are desperate enough will unfortunately do that, given there was no proper convincing alternative. Now we have the convincing alternative. Second, we need to make a meaningful change in people's lives. And a lot of that has happened after the blast too. People will remember who was on TV, who didn't even pay their condolences to the victims that they killed, and who was there for them without taking photos and putting a sticker and sponsoring a post that I gave you a bag of rice with Quwat Lubnaniya on it, or Amal hand sanitizers during COVID.
Also, keep in mind, non-Lebanese were never given the compensation that they rightfully deserved by the government for the people they have lost in the Beirut port explosion. Jana,
sorry, I took on a tangent. Sorry, Jana.
No, not at all. But the thing is, we really want to approach this from both perspectives, locally, but then also what you're suggesting people in the diaspora can do. So just to have both takes on it. Jana, in terms of local activism, not only from the perspective of students, but then also basing on the success stories of the past few years, but then also on the gaps that were not completed. Where do you think activism plays a pivotal role in the local community, and where is it that we should put more effort on it in terms of freedom of speech?
Technically, everyone is working now on the election. They are all working on preparing, spreading the word over that the opposition is going to be running, that they're going to be is there going to be a coalition or not. So they are organizing them. Most of activism is technically going all toward this way, which is the elections. So, and in fact, when it comes to freedom of speech, they are all practicing that right when it comes to anything that is related to censorship, regarding how these people are gonna use their ways to censor you as people, as opposition, or any way, but either by not letting them, let's say, continue in their job. If you don't vote for me, I won't let you continue in your job, or if you vote for me, I will give you that or this. So mainly they are trying to all focus on not raising awareness, but mainly spreading the word that yes, it's a long way to go, but we need to be all together and to focus on voting for the alternative in order to be able to actually not seek their help with these type of things, or actually not anymore live under the terror of, if you're not gonna vote for me, you're not gonna get this job, or etc. Aslan, there's no
beyond
jobs.
voting, beyond the ballot, where should activism be focused?
To second what Gino said, as for activism, it's not only about demanding your rights or talking or spreading or going to manifestations. It's also about creating the alternative, as if I want to word it in that way. So technically, it's about trying to help the current societies and the people enduring all this everything that we're going through. For example, a group of volunteers went all to base camp last week on Christmas, and they worked all together to prepare something for the people around the area, to let them kind of get what is supposed to be of a celebration for Christmas. So it's mostly focused on, for example, when the Israeli ships spread their oil fuel on our shores in Sur specifically. Mostly they were all a group of activists went to the beaches and tried to clean them, to remove the oils, just because our dear government didn't do their job. So it's mainly focused on doing what we have to do because we are citizens of this society, and it's our responsibility.
And also to add to that, if I may, as a political activist as well, there are a lot of spontaneous movements that happened over the past couple of years. It would start with the initiative of an individual that would post about it on social media, that would gather enough momentum, and then you would have certain roads being blocked, ministers or MPs in a restaurant who can no longer eat, and now they're afraid of traveling first class or business class whenever they want to go anywhere. And all of that has started out of independent initiatives. There's a lot of emphasis and importance to the upcoming elections. And of course, that plays a very important role in determining the immediate and long-term future of the country. But then there's also a lot that is not based on the voting, because for the work that activists have done over the past couple of years, be it locally or the lobbying that happened abroad, the effort of the diaspora in supporting the local community, but then also all the work that the local community did over the past couple of years, what started as independent initiatives has been able to gain this much momentum because people were able to come together. While people were scattered before, they were afraid to voice their opinions because then they could be interrogated, they could be called in without anyone to support them beyond their immediate families or circle of friends. Now you can post about something online and have a group of people support you, have a group of lawyers be there to back you up, have a group of people who are willing to go and protest where you're being detained to help let you out, etc., etc. These people who came together after the protests of 2019 are now, despite some of them being abroad or some of them here who are no longer as active as they used to be. And that's really, this is not particularly a problem because people also have other things to focus on. People can no longer be as active as they used to be in 2019 when they also have to focus on their own livelihoods. Yet, there are a lot of things that people are still doing for each other. And this really goes to show and to shed the light on the impact of 2019. I think when people have come together in the way that they did, and the way they have empowered each other and created the strong network of people who could back each other up, the biggest impact that this has left is that people now know that they are not alone, and that once the elections come, their numbers are significant. What we used to think is a minority of independent, secular, progressive people, we now know is a much higher and significant number, and we can make something out of that. So for the activism, there's so much effort that was put by individuals, but then also people who came together, created groups, were able to increase their outreach, reach people locally and be able to help them, but then also people abroad, reach the diaspora or the international community to ask for support. And there lies the importance of activism. I really want to thank you two for being with us tonight. It's been such a rich and interesting and fun conversation to have. Jana, for all the effort that you have been putting locally. You've been doing such an amazing job. You truly have not just my appreciation, but I'm pretty sure of a lot of people who know about what you've been doing. And to me and to so many, this is just the beginning, because progressive youth-led parties are on the rise, and the upcoming elections are only a part of it. And Gino, for your fearlessness over the past decade and how you've completely become unstoppable locally or abroad. I'd like to thank you too for being with us, for your experiences, for all you have added to this session. And this is hopefully just the beginning. Aya, would you like to add anything?
I think you've said it all. Thank you, Jana, and thank you, Gino and Jad. You have a very, very wide experience from different aspects, and I loved hearing everything you had to say.